A simple act of kindness on a busy Los Angeles street sets off a storm no one could have predicted. When a pregnant woman stops to help an elderly stranger pick up her fallen groceries, a jealous mistress decides to humiliate her, laughing and recording the moment for the world to see. But what she doesn't know is that the frail old lady she mocks is the mother of the most powerful mafia boss in the city. What follows is a stunning reversal of power, a tale of arrogance, retribution, and redemption that will leave you speechless by the end. Stay with me until the last second, because every choice in this story has a price. Tell us what time you're watching and where you're tuning in from. Drop a comment below. We'd love to hear from you. It was one of those Los Angeles afternoons when the light seems almost too perfect, the kind that makes every reflection sharper and every mistake impossible to hide. Traffic crawled along Wilshire Boulevard, horns echoing against the glass towers, and the air shimmered with heat and impatience. In the middle of that chaos, a pregnant woman stood on the sidewalk, her hands gently lifting a small paper bag that had fallen beside a frail old lady. The woman was Isabella Hart, 7 months pregnant, dressed in a pale cream blouse and soft beige skirt. She looked out of place among the sharp suits and tinted cars rushing past. Her belly moved slightly as the baby kicked, and she smiled, whispering something only a mother could understand. The old lady in front of her, wrapped in a faded gray coat and a scarf that had seen too many winters, looked embarrassed. "Please don't worry," Isabella said softly. "Let me help you pick these up." The old woman's voice trembled. "People don't usually stop. They just walk around me." "Well, they should," Isabella replied, brushing dust off a loaf of bread and placing it back into the bag. For a moment, it was a simple act of kindness. But that moment didn't last long. A flash of red caught everyone's attention. A sleek sports car pulled up sharply to the curb, its tires screeching against the concrete. The door swung open, and out stepped a woman whose presence could silence a crowd. Her name was Lila Monroe. She wore a fitted crimson dress that gleamed in the sunlight, diamonds at her wrist, sunglasses covering eyes that were used to judging more than seeing. She looked at Isabella and laughed. "Well, if it isn't the famous Mrs. Hart," she said loud enough for people nearby to hear. "The CEO's wife playing saint again? Picking trash off the sidewalk to make yourself look good?" A few pedestrians slowed down. A man with a delivery bag pulled out his phone. Lila knew exactly what she was doing. She raised her phone, opened a live stream, and tilted the camera toward Isabella and the old woman. "Everyone, take a look," she said in a sweet, poisonous tone. "Here's what humility looks like when it's fake. Some people will do anything for attention, even pretend to care about beggars." The old woman's hands shook. She tried to take the bag back, whispering, "I didn't ask for help." Isabella stood between them, her voice calm but firm. "It's fine, ma'am. You didn't do anything wrong." Then she turned to Lila. "You don't need to record this. It's cruel." "Cruel?" Lila smirked. "What's cruel is watching a rich woman perform her little charity act while the cameras roll. Tell me, Isabella, is this what you do when your husband's not home? Practice your image?" The people nearby began whispering. Some were uncomfortable, some curious, some entertained. The city, always hungry for drama, had found a new scene. Isabella's hands rested protectively on her belly. Her cheeks burned, but she didn't look away. "I don't care what you think of me," she said quietly. "This woman needed help. That's all that matters." Lila lowered her sunglasses and gave a slow, exaggerated clap. "Bravo. Maybe next time you can invite the press." "Oh, wait, I'm already here." The crowd chuckled nervously. A few phones were pointed toward them now. Isabella's car was still idling by the curb, its door open, the seatbelt dangling like a silent invitation to walk away. But she didn't move. The old lady's voice broke through the noise. "You shouldn't speak like that, young woman. Kindness isn't weakness." Lila laughed again. "And you shouldn't lecture people who wear shoes that cost more than your rent." She waved her phone toward the woman's face. "Smile for the internet. Maybe someone will donate $1. A young man nearby muttered, "That's messed up." Lila turned her glare on him. "Mind your business." But the attention had shifted. People were no longer laughing. A few shook their heads. Others whispered words of sympathy to Isabella. The light from the setting sun reflected off a nearby glass window, bouncing directly into Lila's eyes. She cursed and took a step back, fanning herself impatiently. Isabella bent down once more, helping the old lady to her feet. "Let's get you to the corner cafe. I'll buy you some water." The woman nodded, still trembling. "You have a good heart, dear." As Isabella guided her away, the phone cameras followed. Lila's expression darkened. "Unbelievable," she muttered. Still acting for the crowd, she climbed back into her car and slammed the door, the engine roaring as she sped off, leaving a streak of noise and anger behind. The street grew quiet again. The sound of traffic faded under the hum of distant music from a street performer. Isabella helped the old woman sit at a bus stop bench, handing her the recovered bag. "Thank you, my dear," the woman said. "You didn't have to stop." "Yes, I did," Isabella replied. "Everyone deserves a little respect." The woman looked at her for a long moment. Her eyes were dark, sharp, too alive for someone living on the streets. "You believe that?" she asked. "I do." A faint smile appeared on the woman's face. "Then remember this moment." Isabella nodded, not understanding the weight behind those words. She watched as the woman stood, adjusting her scarf. For a split second, the sunlight caught something glinting beneath it, a thin gold chain with a crest carved into the pendant. It looked expensive, completely out of place. Before Isabella could say anything, the woman turned and walked into the crowd, disappearing as quickly as she had appeared. The last shot of the scene: Isabella standing alone on the sidewalk, her blouse stained with dust, her face thoughtful but calm. And in the reflection of a nearby store window, a small red light blinked on from one of the phones still recording. No one knew yet who that old woman really was. But the city was about to find out. Morning sunlight slipped through the blinds of Isabella's apartment, cutting lines of gold across the polished marble floor. The world outside moved on, but inside, silence pressed heavy against the air. The night before had already gone viral. Clips of the argument on Wilshire Boulevard were spreading through social media like wildfire. The title of one video read, "CEO's wife pretends to help, homeless woman gets exposed by mistress." Another had over 100,000 views and counting. Isabella sat at the kitchen table, her hands resting over her swollen belly. The glow of her phone lit her face as comments scrolled endlessly across the screen. Some called her fake, some called her an angel, and others didn't care about the truth at all. They just wanted to watch the fight. Her phone buzzed again, a message from her husband, Ethan. "Stop engaging with that nonsense. You're embarrassing yourself in the company." She stared at the message for a long moment, her thumb hovering above the screen. Then she turned the phone over, face down, and whispered to herself, "I didn't do anything wrong." Outside, the city was loud again. Cars honked. People talked. Life refused to stop for anyone's pain. Isabella looked at her reflection in the window, seeing a tired face, eyes rimmed red from lack of sleep. She placed a hand on her belly, trying to steady her breathing. A knock echoed through the apartment. When she opened the door, her best friend, Grace, stood there holding a cup of coffee and a worried smile. "Don't look at the comments," Grace said as she walked in. "People online will destroy anyone just for fun." Isabella gave a weak laugh. "It's not the strangers that hurt, it's him." Grace sighed. "Ethan should have defended you. I saw the video, Bella. He stood there while that woman mocked you. He said it would look bad if he argued in public. That it was about reputation," Isabella replied quietly. Grace set the coffee down and took her friend's hand. "Reputation means nothing when your heart's already broken." For a moment, Isabella wanted to believe that the storm would pass. But the truth was harsher. The clip was spreading beyond gossip pages now. Morning news segments were already replaying it, pausing on the part where Lila laughed. Every network wanted the angle. The perfect wife, the cruel mistress, and the silent husband. By noon, Ethan called. His voice was tight, controlled, the way it always was when he spoke to employees rather than family. "I need you to stay home today. No statements, no interviews. Just let PR handle it." "Ethan, she humiliated me in front of everyone," Isabella said, her voice trembling. "You saw what she did. That woman doesn't even know who that old lady was, and yet she—" "Stop," I said. Enough. His tone sharpened. "You're turning a small issue into a circus. I have investors asking questions, and this is not the time." Her lips parted, but no sound came. He hung up before she could say another word. The call left her hollow. She leaned back against the counter, staring at the city skyline through the window. Somewhere down there, life was moving at its usual pace. Somewhere, people were laughing over the very scene that had shattered her peace. Later that afternoon, she had to step outside. The walls felt too close, the air too heavy. She pulled on a simple blue dress, tied her hair back, and drove to a nearby grocery store. She tried to walk quickly, hoping no one would notice her. But fame has its own scent, and in Los Angeles, everyone could smell a scandal. Two women near the checkout line whispered loudly enough for her to hear. "That's her, right? The one from the video?" "Yeah, the fake charity lady. Poor thing probably loves the attention." Isabella felt her throat tighten. She placed her groceries on the belt and forced a polite smile at the cashier. The girl hesitated before scanning the items, eyes flicking toward her face. "Are you the woman who helped that old lady?" Isabella nodded. "Yes." The girl's voice softened. "I saw the video. You did nothing wrong. That other woman was awful." Something small but warm flickered inside Isabella's chest. "Thank you," she said quietly. Outside, the afternoon wind had picked up. She walked toward her car, clutching the bag of groceries to her chest. Across the parking lot, a sleek black SUV slowed down beside her. The tinted window rolled down, and Lila's perfect smile appeared behind designer sunglasses. "Out shopping for more charity cases?" Lila teased, voice dripping with satisfaction. "You're trending again, darling. Congratulations." Isabella froze. "You've done enough." "Oh, come on," Lila continued. "You should thank me. Without me, no one would even know your name." A security guard nearby glanced in their direction, uncertain whether to intervene. Isabella straightened her back. "You humiliated an old woman who did nothing to you, and you made fun of me for helping her. That's not power, Lila. That's cruelty." Lila's smile faltered for just a second. "You think kindness makes you better than me?" "No," Isabella replied, "but it makes me sleep at night." Lila rolled her eyes and laughed. "You're ridiculous." She gestured toward her phone again, pretending to record. "Say hi to your fans." This time, Isabella didn't back away. She looked straight into the camera. "You should be careful about who you mock, Lila. Not everyone you look down on is as helpless as they seem." The guard finally approached, and Lila scoffed before driving off, tires squealing as the SUV disappeared into traffic. The parking lot fell silent again. Isabella stood there, her heart pounding, the baby moving restlessly as if sensing her mother's fear. She looked up at the cloudy sky, whispering to herself, "I just want peace." Back in the car, her phone buzzed again. A notification. New viral post. Old lady from viral video speaks out. Her breath caught. She clicked the link. It wasn't a tabloid, not even a gossip site. It was a local news page with a single blurred photo of the same elderly woman she had helped. The headline read, "Witness steps forward to defend pregnant woman in viral incident." The article said the woman had refused interviews but had left a note at the news station. "Kindness should never be mocked. Some lessons will be learned the hard way." Isabella exhaled slowly. For the first time since the ordeal began, a sense of quiet strength replaced the ache in her chest. She didn't know who that woman truly was, but something told her this story was far from over. The camera would fade out on her face, the reflection of the city skyline shining in her eyes. The narrator's voice would linger. Sometimes the smallest act of compassion becomes the spark that ignites a storm. And somewhere, unseen by Isabella, a black car parked outside a high-rise tower. Inside it, the same old woman from yesterday sat with two men in suits. She handed one of them a small phone and whispered, "Find out everything about that woman named Lila." The game had quietly begun. Evening settled over Los Angeles like a velvet curtain. The skyline shimmered under the weight of glass and neon, and from the corner office of Hart Industries, Ethan Hart stood by the window, phone pressed to his ear. His reflection looked back at him, confident, expensive, and empty. "Yes, I saw it," he said quietly. "The PR team will issue a statement tomorrow. Nothing emotional, just business." He paused, staring down at the city lights. "No, she's fine. Embarrassed, but fine. She always overreacts." He ended the call and slipped the phone into his pocket. Behind him, the office door opened with a soft click. Lila Monroe stepped inside, wearing a fitted black dress that glimmered like oil under the light. She walked slowly toward him, her perfume trailing through the air like smoke. "Still working damage control?" she asked, her tone sweet with mock sympathy. Ethan turned to face her. "You really shouldn't have gone after her like that, Lila. That video has caused more trouble than you realize." Lila smiled, tilting her head. "Please. Trouble sells. Look at the numbers. Your company's name is everywhere. At least people are talking about you." "They're not talking about me. They're talking about my wife." His voice was low but sharp. "You humiliated her in public." Lila's lips curved into a smirk. "She humiliated herself. Who stops in the middle of Wilshire Boulevard to play Florence Nightingale for a random street hag? She practically begged me to say something. Ethan's jaw tightened. He turned away, rubbing the bridge of his nose. You don't understand the consequences. Investors see chaos, not confidence. And Isabella looks like a liability now. Lila crossed her arms, feigning innocence. Then maybe it's time you stop protecting her. He looked up sharply. What are you suggesting? Let's be honest, Lila said, walking closer until her reflection merged with his in the glass. You married her when you were still building this empire. She played the perfect wife, the smiling face for the cameras. But now, she's slowing you down. She hides behind kindness because she has nothing else. Ethan stayed silent, eyes fixed on the city. Lila's voice softened. You deserve someone who understands you. Someone who doesn't make scenes in public. Someone who won't drag your name through the dirt because she can't mind her own business. She reached out and touched his sleeve. You deserve me. For a long moment, the only sound in the office was the hum of the city below. Ethan finally spoke. You're very confident in yourself, Lila. Confidence is what got me here. He gave a short laugh. You got here because I let you. Lila's expression flickered, but she recovered quickly. You let me? Ethan, I built your image when your company was falling apart 2 years ago. I turned you into the story people wanted to see. Without me, you'd still be that nervous executive begging for investors. Ethan's voice grew colder. And now you're the woman the internet calls a bully. The smile on her face faltered again, replaced by something sharp. That old woman deserved it. You saw her. She was probably a con artist. Enough, he snapped, turning away. You're done talking about this. Lila's eyes narrowed. You're still defending her. She's my wife, he said simply. On paper, Lila hissed. But we both know who you really spend your nights with. Ethan didn't answer. He walked back to his desk, adjusting the cuffs of his shirt, pretending to read a document that no longer made sense. Lila moved closer. End it, Ethan, she whispered. End the charade. You said it yourself. She's too emotional, too naive. The board is losing confidence. If you divorce her now, people will understand. They'll think she couldn't handle the pressure. He looked up slowly. You think this is about the board? It's about control, Lila replied. You've always had it. Don't lose it over a woman who thinks picking up trash makes her holy. The words hung in the air, poisonous and quiet. Ethan didn't respond, but something in his face shifted. The hesitation in his eyes hardened into calculation. Hours later, he arrived home to find Isabella sitting on the couch, laptop open, watching the latest headlines. The light from the screen reflected off her pale face. When he entered, she turned off the computer and stood up. I thought you'd be home earlier, she said softly. I had work, he replied, setting his briefcase down. You shouldn't be reading those comments. It's not helping. I wasn't, she said. I was reading an article about that old woman. She defended me, Ethan. She told the press that kindness isn't weakness. He didn't respond. He loosened his tie and walked to the kitchen. Good for her. Isabella frowned. That's all you have to say? What do you want me to say? He shot back. That you were right? That humiliating me in public was justified? Her eyes widened. Humiliating you? Ethan, I was helping someone who fell. You're making it sound like a crime. He turned, voice rising. It became one when it went viral. Do you have any idea what this has done to my company? I didn't know compassion was bad for business, she said quietly. It's bad when it makes me look weak. The words cut deeper than he realized. Isabella took a step back, her breath shaky. So that's what this is about. Your image, not what's right. Ethan ran a hand through his hair, avoiding her gaze. You always twist things. You don't understand how the world works, Bella. People respect power, not pity. Lou. She looked at him for a long moment. And what about respect for yourself? He froze, the question hitting harder than he expected. I married a man who once told me kindness was strength, she said. I don't know who you are anymore. Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed his keys and walked to the door. I'm staying at the office tonight. I need space to think. The door closed behind him with a final click. Silence filled the apartment. Isabella stood in the empty living room, the baby's soft kick against her ribs, the only reminder she wasn't completely alone. She whispered to herself, if he can't see the difference between love and control, maybe he's already lost. Outside, the city lights glimmered cold and distant. Somewhere far away, in a private estate surrounded by black cars, an old woman in a silk robe watched a replay of the same viral video. She poured herself a glass of wine and smiled faintly. People reveal their true selves when they think no one is watching, she murmured. And I always watch. The next evening arrived with a kind of artificial glow that only Los Angeles could produce. The city pulsed with noise, music, and money. Cameras flashed outside the entrance of the Avalon Hotel, where Hart Industries was hosting a charity dinner to repair its image. The lobby was filled with flowers, champagne, and faces that cared more about being seen than about giving. Isabella hesitated before stepping out of the car. The driver opened the door, and the murmur of conversations hit her like a wave. Every movement, every breath she took felt heavier since the argument with Ethan. He had barely spoken to her all day, just a short text that said, "Be there on time. Smile for the cameras." She adjusted her light blue gown and touched the small silver cross around her neck. Her reflection in the car window looked calm, but her heartbeat told a different story. Inside the grand ballroom, chandeliers sparkled like constellations. Laughter drifted through the air, elegant and hollow. Isabella moved quietly through the crowd, greeting board members and familiar faces. Some smiled politely, others whispered as she passed. She could feel their curiosity prickling at her back. Near the bar, she saw Ethan standing with a group of investors. His hand rested casually at his side, but the space beside him was already occupied. Lila Monroe, radiant in a deep red gown, stood close enough to blur the line between confidence and possession. She laughed too loudly, gestured too gracefully, and every camera seemed to find her without effort. When Isabella approached, the group went silent. Ethan turned toward her with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Darling," he said smoothly, "you made it." Lila turned as well, her expression painted with sugar and venom. "Isabella, I was wondering when you'd arrive. You look comfortable." The word landed like a blade wrapped in silk. Isabella smiled faintly. "Thank you. I'm glad you're here to represent Hart Industries too." "Oh, I always represent the company," Lila said, swirling the wine in her glass. "In fact, I was just telling the press about our expansion deal with the Italian investors. You know, the ones we met last month." Ethan cleared his throat, sensing the shift. "That's confidential, Lila." She giggled. "Relax, boss. I only gave them a little teaser." Isabella's eyes flicked to Ethan. "You took her to meet investors?" Ethan's jaw tightened. "It was a business dinner. You weren't well at the time." Lila smirked. He needed someone who could keep up with the conversation and the wine. A few nearby guests exchanged glances, pretending not to listen. Isabella's stomach turned, but she refused to give Lila the satisfaction of seeing pain. She lifted her chin. "I'm glad you enjoyed yourself. I'm sure you made quite an impression." "Oh, I did," Lila said, leaning closer. "You wouldn't believe how charming your husband is when he's not distracted." Ethan shot her a warning look, but she ignored it. She placed her manicured hand on his sleeve and smiled at the flashing cameras across the room. A photographer called out, "Mr. Hart, one picture for the magazine." Ethan hesitated. Lila tightened her grip and posed with him, her head tilted perfectly against his shoulder. The lights flashed, capturing an image that would circulate online before the night ended. Isabella stood frozen. Every camera that caught them together felt like another cut across her skin. She forced a small smile and turned away. The murmur of the crowd filled her ears, the music blending with laughter until she could barely breathe. Lila followed her with her eyes, satisfied. She whispered something to a nearby reporter, who scribbled in his notebook before slipping away. By the time Isabella reached the far end of the room, Grace appeared beside her. "You don't have to stay here," she whispered. "I can't leave," Isabella said quietly. "If I walk out now, it'll look like she won." Grace's gaze followed Lila across the ballroom. "She's enjoying every second of this." "I know," Isabella said, "but she's showing her hand too early." The words sounded stronger than she felt. Her heart still ached, but somewhere beneath the pain was a new kind of resolve. Half an hour later, the charity dinner officially began. Ethan took the stage to give his opening speech, thanking guests for supporting women's welfare initiatives. His voice was polished, professional, practiced. Isabella stood at her assigned table near the front, smiling when the cameras turned her way. Lila sat 2 tables behind, surrounded by admirers. She leaned back in her chair, sipping champagne and pretending to listen. When Ethan mentioned Isabella by name, thanking his wife for her compassionate example, Lila let out a quiet, mocking laugh. A few people nearby joined her. After the speech, reporters swarmed Ethan for interviews. Lila seized the moment, stepping into the spotlight with him. She placed her arm around his back, her body language claiming territory. The flashbulbs erupted again. One reporter called out, "Miss Monroe, are you part of the Hart Foundation team?" Lila smiled brightly. "Oh, I'm involved in many things Mr. Hart does. We make a great pair." The statement landed like a grenade. Isabella watched from across the room, her knuckles tightening around her glass. Every guest heard it. The whispers began again, crawling through the air like a spreading fire. Ethan's face stiffened, but he said nothing. His silence was louder than any denial. When the interviews ended, Lila glided toward Isabella, her heels clicking like the countdown of a clock. She stopped beside her table, lowering her voice so only Isabella could hear. "People are starting to see who the real Mrs. Hart is, and it's not you." Isabella looked up, eyes calm but cold. "You think attention makes you powerful, but it only makes you visible. And when people see you clearly, they'll see the truth." Lila laughed softly. "Truth doesn't matter, sweetheart. Perception does." "No." She straightened, waved to a group of guests, and walked away, her dress catching the light like a flame. Grace leaned closer to Isabella. "You handled that better than I would have." Isabella forced a breath. Let her shine. Sometimes, people light themselves up just to reveal their own shadows. The camera would linger on Isabella's face, her expression composed but wounded. The sound of champagne glasses clinking would fade into the echo of distant applause. In a corner of the room, unseen by both women, an elderly figure watched from the shadows of the balcony above. Maria Leone observed everything, her expression unreadable. One of her men leaned forward and whispered, "Do we proceed?" Maria nodded once. "Not yet. Let them show who they are." The screen would fade to black on the image of Lila laughing under the chandelier, unaware that the game she thought she was winning had already begun to turn. The night after the charity event felt colder than it should have been. Los Angeles lights still glittered, but inside the penthouse of the Hart residence, the silence was sharp enough to cut through glass. Isabella sat by the living room window, her blue dress still draped over the chair beside her, her hair pulled back loosely. The faint sound of traffic below barely reached the high floor. She had replayed the evening 100 times in her mind. The laughter. The cameras flashing on Lila's red gown. The way Ethan stood beside her without a word. Each memory felt like a small betrayal, another thread unraveling in what used to be love. The elevator dinged, and the door opened behind her. Ethan entered, his tie undone, his face lined with exhaustion. He smelled faintly of whiskey. The sound of his footsteps echoed against the marble. "You're still awake," he said flatly. "I couldn't sleep," she replied without turning around. "It's hard to rest after being humiliated in front of half the city." He dropped his keys onto the counter. "You're exaggerating." She stood and faced him. "Am I? You let her hang on your arm. You let her speak for you, and you said nothing. Do you know what people are saying?" "I don't care what people are saying," he said sharply. "What matters is the company, the investors. And your image," she added quietly. "Always your image." Ethan crossed his arms. "This isn't about jealousy, Isabella. It's about survival. You're emotional. You don't understand the kind of pressure I'm under." "I understand plenty," she said. "You're letting that woman control how the world sees you. And worse, how you see yourself." He took a step closer. "You're turning this into a moral lecture again. I don't need saving. I need results." "Results?" Her voice trembled with anger. "You mean deals, contracts, and cameras. What about your family? What about this baby?" Ethan's expression softened for a moment, then hardened again. "Don't use the baby to win arguments." "I'm not. I'm trying to remind you what matters." He walked past her toward the liquor cabinet. "What matters is stability. You should know that by now." She turned, watching him pour a drink. "Stability doesn't come from fear, Ethan. It comes from respect." He slammed the glass down, the sound sharp against the counter. "Respect is earned, Lud, and love is lost," she whispered. The words hung between them like smoke. Ethan looked at her for a long moment, something flickering in his eyes, but before he could speak, his phone buzzed. He checked the screen. A message from Lila. He didn't hide it. Isabella saw her name and felt the air leave her chest. "You're still talking to her." "It's business," he said, but even he didn't believe it. "Business doesn't text at midnight," she replied. Ethan pocketed the phone. "You're being paranoid." "No," she said quietly. "I'm being honest." The tension broke when the intercom buzzed. A guard's voice crackled through. "Sir, Miss Monroe is downstairs. She insists it's urgent." Isabella stared at him. "You're not letting her in." Ethan hesitated, but curiosity outweighed reason. "Send her up." Within minutes, the elevator opened again. Lila stepped out, wearing a tailored black coat, her hair styled perfectly as if the night never ended. Her eyes flicked between them, her lips curling into a practiced smile. "I'm sorry to intrude," she said smoothly, "but we have a problem." Ethan frowned. "What problem?" "Your Italian investors are threatening to pull out after that little stunt last night," Lila said, glancing toward Isabella. "They think the company is unstable." "Then we'll schedule a call in the morning," he replied. "No," she said firmly. "They want reassurance tonight. They're in Milan. It's already morning there. If we don't respond, they'll move their money." Ethan rubbed his temples. "Fine, I'll handle it from the office." Lila looked pleased. "Good, I'll come with you." Isabella stepped forward. "No, you won't." Lila arched an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "You've done enough," Isabella said, her tone calm but icy. "You don't belong here, and you don't belong in his business." Lila's smile turned sharp. "This is exactly why people see you as weak, always emotional, always trying to play the victim." "One." Isabella met her eyes steadily. "I don't play anything. I live with the consequences." Ethan's voice cut through the tension. "Enough, both of you." He turned to Lila. "I'll meet you downstairs." Lila looked triumphant. She brushed past Isabella, her perfume trailing behind like a warning. When the elevator door closed, Isabella spoke softly. "If you leave with her, there's no coming back." Ethan hesitated. "You're overreacting." "I mean it," she said, her voice steady now. "You're choosing her over your family." "I'm choosing what's best for the company." She shook her head. "No, you're choosing pride." He didn't answer. He just grabbed his coat and left. The moment the door closed, Isabella felt her knees weaken. She sank onto the couch, one hand over her stomach, whispering to the baby, "It's going to be all right, I promise." But across town, the scene inside Lila's car painted a different picture. She sat beside Ethan as the driver pulled away from the building. Her smile returned, wide and satisfied. "You did the right thing," she purred. "She's holding you back. Once this deal is secured, you can finally be free." Ethan stared out the window, his face unreadable. "You talk like this is some game." "Life is a game," Lila said, "and people like us play to win." He said nothing. Back at the penthouse, Isabella's phone vibrated. It was Grace again. "Bella, turn on the news," her voice urged. Isabella reached for the remote. The television flickered to life. On the screen was a live feed from outside the Avalon Hotel. Reporters surrounded a black car identical to Lila's. They shouted questions about the heart affair, and one reporter held up a new document. "Breaking news," the anchor said. "Leaked footage suggests the woman involved in last night's viral video may be linked to a high-profile organized family. Sources claim the homeless woman from the viral clip is actually Maria Leone, mother of reputed businessman Antonio Leone." Isabella froze. The name struck like lightning. Grace's voice came through the phone again. "Bella, that's the woman you helped." Her heartbeat quickened. "Oh my God." As the report continued, the anchor added, "Representatives from the Leone family have declined to comment, but sources say they are aware of the incident." "Yeah." Isabella turned off the TV, realization washing over her. The woman she helped was no ordinary stranger, and Lila had just insulted the most dangerous mother in Los Angeles. The camera would pull back from Isabella's face, her eyes filled with fear and a quiet sense of justice beginning to form. Somewhere across the city, in a mansion guarded by shadows, Maria Leone smiled as she watched the same broadcast. She whispered to her advisor, "Now we begin." The storm had officially started. The next morning, the city woke up to chaos. Los Angeles thrived on gossip, and this story had everything it craved: power, betrayal, wealth, and now, danger. By sunrise, the internet was flooded with side-by-side pictures of Lila Monroe at the charity event and screenshots from the viral street video. Headlines screamed across every newsfeed. Mistress humiliates wife of CEO, unknowingly offends Mafia matriarch. Inside Hart Industries, phones rang non-stop. Assistants whispered frantically. Journalists waited in the lobby, and security guards tried to keep reporters at bay. In the middle of that storm, Ethan Hart sat at the head of a long glass table, staring at the muted TV screen mounted on the wall. Every channel showed Lila's face. Every anchor repeated the same phrase: Maria Leone, the mother of Don Antonio. Across from him, Lila adjusted her sunglasses, even though they were indoors. Her phone kept buzzing, the notifications relentless. She ignored them all and tried to look composed. "They're exaggerating," she said, forcing a laugh. "So I insulted some old woman. Who cares?" Ethan turned toward her slowly. "That old woman could destroy us." "She's not going to," Lila replied, waving a manicured hand. "People like her don't waste time on drama. She'll forget it." The boardroom door opened before he could respond. His assistant, a nervous young man, stepped in holding a stack of papers. "Sir, we have a serious problem. Leone Holdings just froze their pending contracts. They also canceled the security partnership." Ethan's jaw clenched. "That's hundreds of millions in assets." The assistant nodded. "They said the decision is permanent." Lila's laugh came out too high-pitched. "They're bluffing." Ethan slammed his palm on the table. "Do you ever stop talking?" She flinched. "Ethan, relax. We can fix this." He leaned closer, his voice low. "You humiliated my wife, dragged my company into your ego trip, and picked a fight with a family that controls half the city. There is no fixing this." For the first time, Lila's confidence cracked. She swallowed hard, her painted smile faltering. "You're not blaming me for all of this." "I'm blaming you for everything," he said. "And I'm blaming myself for letting it happen." The assistant quietly backed out of the room, closing the door behind him. Meanwhile, across the city, Isabella sat in her living room watching the same news coverage. Her phone buzzed constantly with messages from friends and reporters. Grace called again, her voice trembling with disbelief. "Bella, it's everywhere. That woman, Maria Leone, she's powerful. People say she owns half the construction companies in the state." "I didn't know who she was," Isabella said softly. "I just wanted to help her." Grace sighed. "You helped the right person, apparently." "No." On the TV screen, a clip from the charity event replayed. It showed Lila laughing beside Ethan, the crowd clapping, the flash of cameras lighting their faces. Then it cut to the older footage of the street encounter. The contrast was brutal. The woman who mocked the poor, the wife who defended kindness. The narrative had written itself. A knock sounded at Isabella's door. She hesitated, then opened it to find two men in dark suits. One handed her an envelope embossed with a golden crest. "Mrs. Hart," the taller one said politely, "Mrs. Leone asked us to deliver this to you personally." Isabella's heart raced. "Mrs. Leone?" He nodded. "She sends her gratitude." When they left, Isabella sat down and opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a handwritten note in graceful cursive. "You showed kindness when others showed cruelty. My family does not forget such things. If you ever need protection, call the number below." Beneath the message was a business card. Maria Leone, Leone Foundation. A single phone number printed in gold. For the first time in weeks, Isabella felt a strange sense of safety. Across town, the opposite emotion consumed Lila. As she stepped out of Hart Industries that afternoon, the flashing lights of cameras blinded her. Reporters shouted questions over one another. "Miss Monroe, did you know who you were insulting? Is it true you mocked the Mafia boss's mother? Do you fear for your safety?" Her composure cracked completely. "No comment," she snapped, pushing past them. She climbed into her car, slamming the door, her hands shaking. Inside, her phone rang again. It was a blocked number. She answered without thinking. A calm female voice spoke on the other end. "Miss Monroe, this is the Leone family's office." Lila froze. "Who is this? What do you want?" "Mrs. Leone would like to remind you that words have consequences. She suggests you keep yours to yourself from now on." The line went dead. Lila dropped the phone, her breath quick and shallow. For the first time in her life, fear took the place of arrogance. At the same moment, Ethan sat alone in his office, surrounded by silent phones and half-read emails. The company's stock had already fallen 15%. Messages from investors filled his inbox. Every subject line began with the same word, crisis. He stared at the city skyline outside, his reflection split by the glass. For the first time, he saw himself clearly. The man who had traded decency for ambition. The man who had lost everything that mattered. His door opened softly. Isabella stood there, calm and composed. He blinked, unsure if she was real. "What are you doing here?" "I came to say goodbye," she said simply. "Goodbye? I'm leaving. You wanted your company more than your family. Now you can have it." He rose from his chair. "You can't just walk away. We can fix this." She shook her head. "You can fix your image, Ethan, not your heart." He tried to step closer, but she held up her hand. "Maria Leone sent me a letter today. She thanked me for helping her. Do you understand what that means? It means someone saw everything. someone powerful enough to make sure the truth survives. He looked at her, speechless. She continued, her voice steady. You stood by and let that woman mock me, and now you'll watch her destroy herself. The difference is that I didn't have to lift a finger. For a long moment, Ethan said nothing. Then his shoulders slumped. I never meant for it to get this far. Intentions don't matter when the damage is done. She walked to the door and paused. Good luck, Ethan. You'll need it. When the door closed behind her, Ethan sank into his chair. Outside the office, cameras flashed again as Lila was escorted from the building by security. Her career was finished. Her name was trending for all the wrong reasons. In the final shot, Isabella stepped into the sunlight outside the building. The noise of reporters faded behind her. She placed a protective hand over her belly, her face calm. Across the city, Maria Leone watched the same footage on her private television. She smiled faintly and turned to her assistant. The world takes care of its own justice when people dare to mock kindness. The scene would fade on that smile, leaving the faint echo of her words like a quiet promise. The morning air over Los Angeles carried a different kind of tension. It was quiet, but beneath that quiet ran the pulse of something new. Revenge, redemption, consequences. For some, it meant fear. For others, it meant hope. Isabella woke to the sound of birds outside her window. The sun streamed gently across the curtains, golden and warm. For the first time in months, the apartment felt peaceful. She moved slowly through the kitchen, the soft rhythm of her steps accompanied by the hum of the coffee maker. Her body was heavy from pregnancy, but her mind was light. She had made her decision. On the counter sat the envelope from Maria Leone. She looked at it again, the golden crest glinting faintly in the morning light. There was power in that symbol, but also something more. Gratitude. Her phone buzzed. Grace's name appeared on the screen. Bella, you need to see this, Grace said the moment Isabella answered. Turn on Channel 5. The television flickered on to breaking news. The headline read, Leone family issues statement following viral incident. Isabella's eyes widened. At a podium stood Maria Leone herself, dressed elegantly in black. The world had not seen her face in years. Cameras flashed from every angle. Reporters shouted questions, but she raised her hand once, and silence followed. In this city, Maria began, her voice firm and smooth, people confuse kindness with weakness. A few days ago, someone mocked an act of compassion. They did not know who I was, but that does not matter. What matters is how they treated another human being. She paused. The crowd held its breath. I am here to say that kindness is never foolish. It is strength. The woman in that video showed decency when others showed cruelty. My family stands with her. Gasps rippled through the room. Isabella covered her mouth, her heart pounding. Maria continued. Let this serve as a reminder. The way you treat the powerless reveals who you are when the world is not watching. We have watched, and we will not forget. Reporters erupted in noise, shouting questions, but Maria turned away from the podium, ending the conference. The broadcast cut to commentators, already speculating on the fallout. Grace's voice broke through the line again. Bella, she just made you untouchable. Meh. Isabella leaned back against the couch, still processing what she had seen. The woman she once helped on the sidewalk had just stood before the entire city and declared her loyalty. Across town, the reaction was immediate. At Hart Industries, panic spread like wildfire. Ethan's assistant rushed into his office holding a printed statement from the Leone Foundation. They pulled every contract, he said breathlessly. Investors are withdrawing too. The press is waiting downstairs. Yacht? Ethan sank into his chair, rubbing his temples. Tell them I'm unavailable. Sir, they're saying you and Miss Monroe are under investigation for corporate misconduct. Someone leaked internal emails. They show she was influencing deals. Ethan froze. Who leaked them? No one knows. But whoever it was, they used Leone's private servers to send them anonymously. He knew then. Maria Leone had turned her gratitude into justice. By midday, Lila's apartment was surrounded by reporters. Her once glamorous image had been reduced to a cautionary tale. She stepped outside in dark glasses, shouting at cameras, but no one believed her anymore. Every door that once opened to her was now closed. Meanwhile, Isabella received a private call from a blocked number. She hesitated before answering. Mrs. Hart, said the familiar calm voice. This is Maria. Isabella's throat tightened. Mrs. Leone, I saw your statement. I don't know how to thank you. You already have, Maria replied. You reminded me that compassion still exists. People like you deserve protection, not pity. I would like to meet you." "I would be honored," Isabella whispered. "Tomorrow, noon at the foundation. Bring no one, I'll send a car." The line went silent. That evening, Isabella sat by the window again, staring at the skyline. Grace came over, bringing dinner. "So," Grace said, setting the bags down, "you're meeting her, the Maria Leone." "I am," Isabella said softly. "I'm not afraid. I feel like I already know her." Grace smiled. "You realize she just saved you and destroyed them, right?" "I didn't ask for that," Isabella said. "She did what she thought was right." The next day, the black car arrived exactly at noon. The driver opened the door for her and spoke with quiet respect. "Mrs. Leone is expecting you." The city passed by outside the window. Every landmark felt distant, as if the world itself had shifted. The car stopped in front of a grand stone building surrounded by high iron gates. A plaque read Leone Foundation for Women and Children. Inside, the marble hall smelled of roses and polished wood. Isabella was guided to a sunlit room overlooking a private garden. There, seated beside a piano, was Maria Leone. She looked very different now. Her hair was swept neatly into a bun, her eyes sharp but kind. Isabella stepped forward, unsure how to begin. "Mrs. Leone, I." Maria raised a hand. "Call me Maria, please." Isabella smiled nervously. "Maria, I never imagined I'd see you again." Maria gestured to the seat across from her. "Sit. You did not expect me to be who I am. That is what made your kindness pure. You helped without knowing, and that is rare in this world." Isabella lowered her gaze. "I only did what anyone should do." Maria chuckled softly. "If that were true, I would have never been on that sidewalk alone." They sat in silence for a moment. Then Maria leaned forward. "Tell me, Isabella, what do you want now?" "I want peace," Isabella said. "For my child, for myself. I don't want to fight." Maria nodded slowly. "Peace is earned, just like fear. But sometimes, to protect peace, you must stand behind strength." She slid a small envelope across the table. "This is for you." Inside was a letter of employment from the foundation. Community Advisor, Women's Outreach Program. Maria smiled. "You have a gift. People will listen to you. Use that voice." Tears filled Isabella's eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes," Maria said simply. "And start tomorrow." The camera would linger on the two women sitting together in sunlight. One powerful, one humble, both survivors in different ways. Outside the window, the city moved as it always did, but something invisible had shifted. The balance of power was changing. And far across town, in a dark apartment filled with unopened letters and shattered glass, Lila watched the same press conference replay on television. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow. On the screen, Maria's final words echoed again. "We will not forget." Lila whispered to herself, "Neither will I." The screen would fade out on that image, leaving only the sound of the city in the distance, and the faint hum of justice beginning to settle. By the end of that week, the city no longer talked about the viral video as gossip. It had become a case study in how power could crumble in a single moment of arrogance. Every magazine, every news anchor, and every podcast host was dissecting the same story. The mistress who mocked a stranger and insulted the wrong woman. At the Leone Foundation, Isabella had begun her first days as community advisor. The mornings were filled with quiet purpose. She reviewed outreach programs, met with women who had survived domestic violence, and listened to their stories. For the first time in years, she felt useful in a way that had nothing to do with image or wealth. One afternoon, while sorting through case files, a soft knock sounded at her office door. It was Maria Leone herself, holding a folder. "Busy already?" Maria asked, her tone gentle but amused. "Just getting to know everything," Isabella replied with a smile. "I didn't realize how many women the foundation supports." Maria placed the folder on the desk. "That is what happens when you give power a conscience. People come." Isabella nodded. "You've built something incredible." Maria took a seat across from her. "No, my dear, I built structure. You are building heart, and that is harder." The two women sat in a rare silence that felt comfortable. But Maria's expression soon changed, her eyes sharper. "There is something you should know." "Oh," Isabella frowned slightly. "What is it?" Maria opened the folder and spread several photographs across the desk. They showed Ethan and Lila at the Avalon Hotel, surrounded by reporters, faces pale under flashing lights. Another photo showed Ethan walking out of a courthouse, his lawyer close behind. What happened? Isabella whispered. Maria's voice was calm. Your husband's company is under investigation. It began yesterday. Someone leaked financial records showing illegal campaign donations made through Lila Monroe's consulting firm. The police are calling it corporate fraud. Isabella stared at the images, speechless. He could go to prison? Maria folded her hands. That depends on what he does next. I don't want him to suffer, Isabella said quietly. He lost his way, but he's not evil. Maria studied her carefully. That is what makes you different. Most people in his world would step on the weak to survive, yet you still wish him peace. Isabella sighed. I wish him clarity. Maria leaned forward. Sometimes clarity comes through pain, but do not mistake mercy for weakness. If you forgive too easily, they never learn. Before Isabella could reply, her assistant knocked again. Mrs. Leone, there's a reporter outside asking about the Foundation's connection to the investigation. Maria stood. Tell them the Foundation does not involve itself in corporate affairs. She turned back to Isabella. But the world already knows. It is only a matter of time before everything becomes public. That night, Isabella drove home through the quiet streets, her thoughts heavy. The city lights blurred against the windshield as she remembered the man Ethan used to be. The man who once said kindness was not a strategy but a way of life. When she arrived at her apartment, she found Ethan waiting by the elevator. His suit was wrinkled, his eyes shadowed. Bella, he said softly, stepping forward. She stopped, keys still in hand. How did you find me? I never lost you, he said. I just lost myself. She looked at him, her expression unreadable. What do you want, Ethan? He hesitated. To talk, to explain. You had plenty of chances to talk, you just preferred silence. I was wrong, he said quickly. I thought control meant strength. But when everything fell apart, I realized how fragile it all was. Maria Leone's people came to see me this morning. They offered a deal. A deal? Isabella asked cautiously. They told me if I confess and cooperate with investigators, she'll make sure my company survives. She said you were the reason she's even considering it. Isabella's heart tightened. I didn't ask her to protect you. I know, Ethan said. But she's doing it because of who you are. He took a deep breath. Bella, I'm sorry. For everything. For Lila. For making you doubt yourself. She shook her head slowly. You didn't just make me doubt myself. You made me doubt the world I lived in. But I found something better. I found people who still believe in doing good without expecting applause. He looked down. I'm not asking you to take me back. I just wanted to say it before everything comes out. The elevator opened behind her, its metallic chime filling the silence. Isabella glanced at him one last time. Do what's right, Ethan. Not because of me, because you finally understand. He nodded, tears shining in his eyes. Goodbye, Bella. The doors closed between them. The next morning, the news broke. Ethan Hart had officially resigned as CEO of Hart Industries and turned himself in to authorities. The statement he released to the press read simply, Integrity is not something you buy. It's something you recover. The city exploded with reactions. Some praised him for owning up to his crimes. Others mocked him for falling from grace. But one photograph dominated every front page. It showed Ethan leaving the courthouse, surrounded by flashing lights, while across town, Isabella stood beside Maria Leone at a foundation ribbon-cutting ceremony. In the picture, Isabella was smiling faintly, one hand resting on her stomach, the other holding scissors beside Maria's. Two women, two symbols of resilience. Reporters called it the redemption contrast. Later that day, Maria joined Isabella in her office again. You see what happens when truth finds its way, she said. Even the powerful must kneel before it. Isabella nodded. I didn't expect it to end like this. Maria smiled gently. It hasn't ended. It has only changed direction. Outside the foundation, camera crews gathered to film the event. As Isabella stepped forward to speak, she looked out at the crowd and said, The world watched one act of cruelty go viral, but I hope it remembers what came after. Compassion has consequences too. Applause filled the hall. As the scene closed, the camera would shift to a faraway shot of Lila Monroe sitting alone in a cafe, watching the broadcast on a small television in the corner. Her hands trembled as she lifted her coffee cup. The television reporter said her name, listing her crimes and the lawsuits filed against her. The world that once adored her had turned its back. She whispered to herself, Everyone forgets, but I won't. Her eyes hardened, and the reflection of the TV screen shimmered across them. The story was not entirely over, but for now, justice belonged to those who had earned it. The frame would fade out on Isabella standing at the podium, her voice steady, her presence radiant under the soft glow of afternoon light. Spring arrived early that year. The air in Los Angeles felt lighter, as if the city itself was taking a long breath after months of tension. The storm of scandals and court hearings had finally begun to fade. People had moved on to the next story. But for Isabella, life was just beginning again. 3 months had passed since the investigation ended. Ethan had been sentenced to probation and community service after cooperating fully with authorities. His company was restructured under new leadership. Lila Monroe, once the queen of headlines, was awaiting trial for fraud and defamation. And Isabella, the woman at the center of it all, had become something entirely different. She was no longer the wife of a CEO or the quiet figure in a viral video. She was now the public face of the Leone Foundation's new initiative, the Empathy Project, a program designed to help women rebuild their lives after betrayal, loss, or violence. Inside her new office, the walls were lined with photographs of women smiling beside their families, resumes pinned to bulletin boards, and letters of gratitude sent from across the country. Isabella walked slowly down the hallway, her soft steps echoing in the calm morning light. She stopped at the doorway of the community room, where a group of volunteers prepared care packages. One young woman looked up. "Mrs. Hart, we're almost done with the new shipment." Isabella smiled gently. "Call me Isabella, and thank you. You're doing incredible work." The woman nodded, her face bright with pride. Later, Isabella sat at her desk and opened a small wooden box. Inside was a silver pendant, the same cross she had worn on the night of the charity event. For a long time, it had reminded her of shame. Now it reminded her of survival. She placed it on the desk beside a framed photograph of Maria Leone and herself at the foundation's grand opening. Maria had become more than an ally. She had become a mentor, a friend, and perhaps the mother figure Isabella had never known she needed. That afternoon, Maria entered the office without knocking, as she often did. "You look tired," she said with a teasing tone. "Do you ever rest?" "I'm fine," Isabella replied, closing a folder. "Just preparing next week's fundraiser." Maria chuckled softly. "You have learned quickly. You organize like a soldier." Isabella laughed. "Maybe I learned from the best." "You?" Maria's smile faded into something warmer. "You remind me of myself at your age. The difference is that you lead with heart, not fear. That is why people trust you." "People trust you too," Isabella said. Maria shook her head. "They respect me. That is not the same." She looked out the window, her gaze distant. Respect can be built from power, but trust must be earned with truth. Isabella followed her gaze toward the city below. "Do you ever regret the things you've done to keep power?" Maria's lips curved slightly. "Every day. But regret does not erase purpose. What matters is what you do next." She turned back to Isabella. "And you, my dear, are doing what's next." The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. Grace stepped in, smiling broadly. "Sorry to interrupt, but you're needed downstairs. The press is here early." Isabella nodded. "We'll be right there." "Ho." The three women walked together toward the elevator. As the doors closed, Maria placed a hand on Isabella's shoulder. "Today is not about the past. It is about showing the world what redemption looks like." Downstairs, the lobby buzzed with reporters and guests. A new banner hung above the entrance, the Empathy Project, rebuilding lives through kindness. Isabella took her place at the podium while cameras flashed around the room. She glanced at Maria, who gave her a subtle nod. "Good morning," Isabella began, her voice steady. "A year ago, I was a different person. I thought kindness was something quiet, something invisible. But now I know that kindness is power, real power, because it builds instead of destroys." The crowd listened intently. "There was a time when my life was defined by someone else's decisions. But today, I define it myself. This foundation is not about money or reputation. It's about giving people the chance to start again. Just like I did." "You won." Applause filled the room. Maria stood in the front row, clapping slowly, her eyes glistening with pride. After the speech, Isabella spoke with reporters. One of them asked, "What keeps you motivated after everything you went through?" She smiled. "Knowing that pain can either break you or teach you. I chose to learn." As the event ended, a familiar face appeared at the edge of the crowd. It was Ethan. He looked thinner, older, his expression humble. He waited until the reporters left before approaching her. "I didn't want to interrupt," he said quietly. "I just wanted to see it for myself. What you've built. Isabella looked at him, unsure how to respond. You could have called. I didn't think you'd answer. You're right, she said softly. But you're here now. He nodded. You look happy, truly happy. I never knew how strong you were until I saw what you've done. She smiled faintly. You just didn't want to see it before. No. He lowered his head. I deserve that. Maria walked up then, her presence commanding as always. Mr. Hart, she said coolly, it is good to see you walking in daylight again. Ethan gave a small, respectful nod. Mrs. Leone. Maria looked between them. Sometimes the past returns not to haunt us, but to remind us how far we have come. Isabella, you have work to do. Isabella nodded. Yes, I do. As Ethan turned to leave, she stopped him. Ethan. He looked back. I hope you find peace too. He smiled weakly. I'm trying. The camera would follow Isabella as she walked back into the foundation. Her staff greeted her with applause, her name now associated with resilience instead of scandal. Later that evening, she sat in her office again, the city lights shimmering through the window. She opened her notebook and began writing plans for a new shelter under the Empathy Project. Her handwriting was steady, her heart calm. On her desk lay a small note in Maria's handwriting. The world changes when the right people refuse to stay silent. She smiled and whispered, and when they choose to stay kind. The scene would fade on Isabella's face, lit by the soft glow of her desk lamp, her future unfolding quietly yet powerfully before her. The day of the Foundation's first anniversary arrived quietly. The sun rose over Los Angeles in a soft haze of gold, spilling through the tall windows of the Leone Foundation headquarters. Volunteers moved briskly through the lobby, arranging flowers and banners that read 1 year of the Empathy Project. The air smelled of fresh roses and coffee. Isabella stood in front of the mirror in her office, fastening a delicate silver bracelet around her wrist. It had been a gift from Maria, engraved with the words "Strength through kindness." Her reflection looked older than a year ago, but steadier. There was peace in her eyes now, the kind that comes only after surviving a storm. Grace entered the room, holding a stack of programs. You're up in 10 minutes, she said, smiling. You ready? I think so, Isabella replied. I still get nervous before speeches. That's because you care, Grace said. That's what makes people listen. They walked together toward the main hall. The large glass doors opened to reveal a sea of guests, reporters, and former beneficiaries of the foundation. Many of the women who had once come there for help now stood as mentors, strong and radiant in their new lives. Maria Leone waited by the stage, wearing a simple black suit and pearl earrings. She turned as Isabella approached. You look beautiful, my dear, she said. Thank you, Isabella answered softly. I couldn't have done any of this without you. Maria smiled faintly. You did it yourself. I only cleared the path. As the audience quieted, Maria stepped up to the microphone. A year ago, she began, I met a woman who reminded me that true power lies not in fear or wealth but in compassion. Today, we celebrate what her courage built. Applause filled the hall as Isabella joined her on stage. She took a breath, looked at the crowd, and began to speak. When I first met Mrs. Leone, she said, I had no idea who she was. I only saw someone who needed help. I learned later that kindness, no matter how small, has a way of finding its way back to you. Not through luck, but through people who refuse to let cruelty win. She paused, her voice steady. The Empathy Project is not about me. It is about every person here who decided that life after pain is still worth living. You are proof that forgiveness and strength can exist in the same heart. 0. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Maria placed a hand on Isabella's shoulder as cameras flashed. Later that afternoon, after the event had ended, Isabella walked alone through the garden behind the foundation. The sound of the fountain mixed with the rustle of palm leaves. She sat on a bench, breathing in the quiet. Footsteps approached. She turned to see Ethan standing a few feet away. He looked hesitant but calmer than before. He held a small envelope in his hand. I didn't mean to intrude, he said softly. I just wanted to give you this. Isabella took the envelope carefully. Inside was a check made out to the Empathy Project. The amount was modest, but it came with a note written in Ethan's familiar handwriting. For the place that rebuilt the person I could never appreciate when I had her. She looked up. You didn't have to do this. I wanted to, he said. It's the first honest thing I've done in a long time. Isabella smiled gently. Thank you. I hope you're finding peace. I am, he replied. Watching you made me realize that losing you was the price of my pride. but seeing what you've built makes it easier to accept." They stood in silence for a moment. Then he said quietly, "Goodbye, Isabella. Goodbye, Ethan." He walked away, his figure disappearing through the garden's archway. A soft breeze swept through the leaves. Isabella tilted her head toward the sunlight, feeling no anger, only gratitude. Later, Maria joined her on the bench. "Was that your husband?" "It was," Isabella said. "He's learning to start over too." Maria nodded approvingly. "Then you both learned the same lesson. Power fades, character stays." Isabella smiled. "You sound like my conscience." "Perhaps I am," Maria said with a quiet laugh. She stood and offered her hand. "Come, there's one more thing you should see." They walked back inside to a small room newly built near the foundation's entrance. On the wall hung a large framed photograph from the day Isabella first joined the organization. Below it was a plaque that read, "The Isabella Heart Center for Resilience." Isabella froze, her eyes filling with tears. "Maria, I can't accept this." Maria squeezed her hand. "You already earned it. This is not charity. It is acknowledgement." Isabella whispered, "Thank you." No. The camera would linger on the image of the two women standing side by side, sunlight pouring through the tall windows behind them. The sound of children laughing echoed faintly from the daycare center next door. Outside, the world went on as always. Cars moved, conversations flowed, and the city breathed. But within that building, something lasting had taken root. In the final scene, Isabella sat at her desk as dusk fell. She wrote in her journal, her handwriting slow and deliberate. "Kindness does not erase pain. It transforms it. It turns what was broken into something worth protecting. And if that is all I leave behind, it will be enough." She closed the book, turned off the lamp, and looked out at the city glowing beneath the twilight sky. The last shot lingered on her face, calm and resolute, before fading to black with the soft whisper of her words carried over the screen. Sometimes the smallest act of goodness becomes the greatest legacy. A stormy night. A pregnant wife shoved out of a luxury car onto the cold street, left trembling and alone, her cries drowned by the roar of the engine speeding away. He thinks she is broken, that no one will ever hear her voice again. But what he does not know is that she carries proof of his betrayal and a bloodline more powerful than he ever imagined. What unfolds next is a fight for survival, truth, and justice in the courtroom, where the man who tried to erase her faces the one verdict he cannot escape. And trust me, the ending will hit harder than you expect. Let us know what time you are listening and where you are tuning in from. Drop a comment below, we would love to hear from you. The night was restless, the kind of night where the air itself felt heavy with warning. Rain came down in sheets, beating against the concrete sidewalks and bouncing off the gleaming body of a black luxury car that suddenly screeched to a halt on the side of a nearly deserted street. The sound of brakes echoed sharply through the empty block, scattering a flock of pigeons that had been sheltering under a neon sign. The glow of red taillights cut through the mist like a wound in the darkness. Inside the car, the tension was thick enough to choke on. Her hand, trembling, clutched her rounded belly, seeking comfort where comfort could no longer be found. She was 7 months pregnant, exhausted, and already struggling to catch her breath. The rain smeared across the tinted window, blurring her reflection, but she could still see the outline of her husband beside her. His jaw was clenched, his profile cold and sharp as steel. He didn't look at her. He didn't whisper reassurance. He didn't even seem to see her as a human being anymore. With one sudden motion, he unbuckled her seatbelt, the click of the release sounding louder than the rain itself. "Get out," he muttered, voice low and hard. Her eyes widened. She shook her head, unable to process the cruelty in his tone. "Please, not here. I'm carrying your child. You can't leave me like this." The rain hammered down harder, drumming against the roof, filling the silence that followed her plea. His answer came not in words but in action. He shoved open the passenger door, letting the cold night air and rain sweep in like a tidal wave. With a violent pull on her arm, he dragged her across the seat and pushed her out into the storm. Her knees hit the wet pavement first. The shock of cold water shot through her body. She gasped, clutching her belly, instinctively curling over it to protect the life inside. Pain shot through her leg as she tried to steady herself, the concrete slick beneath her palms. The sound of her sobs mixed with the relentless hiss of rain. For one desperate second, she caught the edge of the car door, her fingers slipping on the polished handle. "Please, she begged, her voice breaking. "Don't do this. I have nowhere to go." But his face was as unmoved as stone. He wrenched the door free of her grasp, slamming it shut with a hollow thud that reverberated through her chest. The engine roared. Tires spun against the wet asphalt, spraying water across her skirt as the car shot forward. The red taillights grew smaller and smaller, until they dissolved into the curtain of rain, leaving her alone on the slick sidewalk. For a moment, the world was nothing but sound. The rush of passing cars in the distance, the hiss of water streaming into gutters, the hammering of her own heartbeat. She wrapped both arms around her belly, whispering through chattering teeth, "It's going to be okay. We'll be okay." The words were more for her own survival than for the child within her, but speaking them aloud kept her from collapsing completely. A single passerby, hidden under a dripping umbrella, slowed at the sight. The glow of their phone screen flickered as they raised it, capturing the image of a pregnant woman crouched on the sidewalk, soaked to the bone, abandoned by the man who had sworn to protect her. Rain streaked her face, mingling with tears until they were indistinguishable. The city seemed to look on in silence, neon lights reflecting in the puddles like unblinking eyes. She pressed her forehead against her knees, the weight of despair heavy, yet somewhere in the distance, the faint click of a camera shutter suggested that her story had just begun. Just hours before the storm, her life seemed like it belonged to a dream. The mansion's tall windows welcomed the afternoon sun, spilling golden light across marble floors. The house was quiet, filled only with the faint melody of a classical piece drifting from hidden speakers. On the surface, everything looked perfect, as if nothing dark could ever enter those walls. She walked slowly through the living room, one hand resting on her stomach, the other brushing against the edge of a velvet couch. The baby kicked softly. She smiled at the movement, whispering to the child that the future would be safe, that they were building something beautiful together. The nursery upstairs was already painted in warm colors. A white crib stood waiting with a mobile of tiny silver stars dangling above it. She had chosen the fabric carefully, convinced that this baby would grow up surrounded by comfort and love. Her husband, the man who had once promised the world to her, sat at a polished mahogany desk near the window. He was going over financial reports, his face hidden behind a stack of papers. His voice carried across the room without warmth, each sentence more of a command than a conversation. "You should not drink orange juice in the morning," he said without looking up. "It makes your sugar levels too high. Switch to water with lemon, and stop wearing those flats. They make you look shorter." She froze for a moment, holding back the sting of his words. "I thought the doctor said orange juice was fine," she murmured, her tone gentle, almost apologetic. He finally lifted his eyes, sharp and cold. "The doctor does not know what I know. Just do as I say." Lo. The golden light of the sun did little to chase away the chill his words left behind. She tried to smile, tried to pretend that he was only being protective. Deep down, though, she felt a knot tightening in her chest. Every decision, from what she ate to the friends she kept, had slowly been taken out of her hands. She remembered when things were different, when his smile was warm and his laughter filled the room. On their wedding day, under a sky full of lanterns, he had whispered into her ear that she was his forever. She had believed him. She had left her career, her independence, her voice, all because she thought she was walking into a partnership built on trust. In the beginning, he brought her flowers and left little notes on her nightstand. "Trust me," one of them had said, written in bold letters. "We will build a perfect family." Oh. Now, as she glanced at him across the vast living room, she realized she had not seen a flower in months. There were no notes, no laughter, no gentle touch. Only corrections, reminders, and instructions. She sank into a cream-colored chair, her hands resting on her belly as if to shield the life growing inside. When did my choices stop being mine? She thought, her heart tightening with the question. She bit her lip, pushing the words back down before they could escape. The baby moved again, a tiny reminder that she was not alone. She drew in a breath and forced a smile, even though no one was watching. She wanted to believe there was still love left somewhere inside him, hidden behind the cold mask he wore. But as the sunlight dimmed and the room grew quieter, that belief felt more fragile than ever. To the outside world, their home was a palace, and their marriage a fairy tale. But in the silence of that room, with her husband's eyes fixed on numbers and not on her, she knew the truth. Perfection was only a picture frame, hiding cracks too deep to be ignored. The night in the mansion was still, except for the faint ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. She had gone to bed early, the weight of pregnancy making her more tired than usual, but sleep refused to come. The house felt colder than ever, as if the walls themselves were holding secrets. She shifted on the mattress, listening to the muffled sound of footsteps echoing downstairs. Curiosity tugged at her. He had told her he would be working late, preparing for a new round of investments. Yet his voice drifted faintly from his study, low and hurried, not the calm tone of a man reviewing paperwork. She slipped on a robe, careful not to make the floorboards creak, and moved silently toward the door. From the top of the staircase, she could see him through the crack of his study door. He was pacing, phone pressed tightly to his ear. The lamp on his desk cast long shadows that stretched across the hardwood floor. His words were sharp, clipped, and every syllable pierced her chest like ice. "She's becoming a liability," he hissed. "The pregnancy has slowed her down. Once she is out of the picture, everything will be ours." Her breath caught. She pressed a hand against her lips to stop a cry from escaping. The sound of rain tapping against the window seemed to grow louder, filling the silence between his cruel words. On the other end of the line came a soft, sultry laugh. The mistress. She had suspected, but now suspicion turned into proof. The voice was smooth, confident, laced with promises of a future built on stolen wealth. "Don't worry," the mistress purred. "She trusts you too much to see it coming. When she's gone, no one will question what belongs to us." Her knees wobbled, forcing her to lean against the cool wooden banister for balance. Tears stung her eyes, blurring her vision. She could not believe what she was hearing. This was not just infidelity. This was betrayal of the cruelest kind, plotted against her and the child she carried. She forced herself to take a step back, heart pounding in her ears, then another. Finally, she returned to the safety of the bedroom, her breath ragged, her mind racing. For several minutes she sat motionless on the edge of the bed, clutching the fabric of her robe, as if it were the only thing holding her together. Then she remembered her phone. Her hands shook as she unlocked it. She knew she had to capture the truth, or no one would believe her. Quietly, she turned on the voice recorder. Every word from his mouth would now be preserved. Every whisper about eliminating her. Every promise of a future with another woman. Every mention of money and power. The device lay hidden beneath the folds of the blanket while she tiptoed back toward the staircase, careful not to be seen. The recorder blinked silently in her hand as his voice carried once again through the crack of the study door. "When she disappears," he said with a certainty that made her blood run cold, "the inheritance is ours. The court will never question it." "No." Her grip tightened on the phone. The recording caught it all. Proof. Evidence that his cruelty was not a moment of anger but a deliberate plan. She returned to the bedroom before her knees could give way. She slid down to the floor, back pressed against the wall, hugging her stomach. The baby shifted inside, as if sensing the storm raging within her. She whispered into the dim light, her voice breaking but determined. "I will not let him take you from me. I will not let him win. No." The recorder blinked again, a small red light in the darkness, holding within it the beginning of justice. The storm outside had calmed to a drizzle by the time she confronted him, but inside the mansion the tension was unrelenting. She clutched the phone in her hand, the recording saved and hidden deep in her files. The knowledge of what she had heard gave her courage, though her body trembled with fear. He was standing near the fireplace, a glass of scotch in his hand, his suit jacket tossed carelessly across the sofa. When she stepped into the room, he looked up with a scowl, as if her very presence were an interruption. "We need to talk," she said, her voice unsteady yet firm. His eyes narrowed. "About what? Your endless complaints?" Her fingers dug into the phone in her pocket. "I know about her. I know what you are planning. I heard everything." La. For the first time, his expression shifted. Surprise flickered across his face, quickly replaced by anger. He set the glass down with a sharp clink and crossed the room in 2 long strides. His hand closed around her wrist, squeezing until she winced. "You don't know what you're saying," he snapped. "You're tired. You're emotional. It's the pregnancy talking." Her voice rose despite the pain. "Stop lying to me. Stop treating me like I'm blind. I have proof." "No?" The word proof made his jaw tighten. His grip released suddenly, only to shove her backward toward the arm of a chair. She stumbled but managed to steady herself, one hand instinctively covering her stomach. "You think anyone will believe you?" he spat. "Without me, you are nothing. No money, no family, no future." Her breath came in shallow bursts. She tried to step past him, but he blocked her path, towering above her like a shadow that refused to move. "I will never let you destroy everything I built," he hissed. In that moment she realized there was no love left, no mercy, no shred of the man she once thought she knew, only greed and control. He grabbed her arm again and yanked her toward the door. She cried out, struggling to keep her balance, but his grip was iron. Her feet barely touched the floor as he dragged her through the hallway, the chandelier lights flashing above like a cruel spotlight. "Please," she pleaded, her voice cracking. "I'm carrying your child. Think of the baby." But her words only fueled his rage. He shoved her through the front door into the damp night. The air was thick with the smell of wet asphalt, and the faint drizzle quickly soaked her thin nightgown. The luxury car was waiting in the driveway, engine already running. He opened the passenger door and forced her inside, his silence more terrifying than words. They drove through the city streets without speaking, the windshield wipers beating a steady rhythm of dread. Finally, he stopped on a deserted corner, far from the glittering lights of their neighborhood. He slammed the car into park, then turned toward her with eyes that held no trace of humanity. "Get out," he ordered. Her throat tightened. She shook her head. "Please, don't. I have nowhere to go. I'll do whatever you want. Just don't leave me here." "Oh." Without warning, he leaned across, wrenched the door open, and shoved her hard. She tumbled onto the wet pavement, her hands scraping against the rough concrete. A cry tore from her throat as she curled protectively around her stomach. The slam of the door echoed in her ears. Tires screeched. Within seconds, the car was gone, the red glow of its taillights swallowed by the night. She lay on the sidewalk, drenched, shivering, and gasping for breath. For a long moment she could not move. The rain mingled with her tears, washing across her face until she could no longer tell the difference. Somewhere deep inside, the baby stirred, reminding her she was not alone. She pressed a trembling hand to her belly, whispering through sobs, "We will survive. I promise you, we will." The rain fell harder again, as if the sky itself were bearing witness to her despair. She pushed herself up from the sidewalk with shaking arms, her palms scraped raw from the fall. The pavement was cold beneath her knees, seeping through the thin fabric of her nightgown. Her breath came in short bursts, fogging the night air, each inhale sharp against her ribs. For a long moment she remained crouched, both arms wrapped protectively around her belly. The baby moved, a small shift inside her that felt like both a warning and a plea. She pressed her hand gently against her stomach, whispering through trembling lips, "It's all right, my love. We will make it. I promise." "No." The street was nearly empty, only a few cars passing by at a distance. Their headlights washed over her for seconds at a time before disappearing back into the curtain of rain. None of them stopped. She tried to rise, her legs weak, her body heavier than it had ever felt, but determination pushed her to her feet. Each step was unsteady, her slippers soaked, slipping against the wet ground. She staggered toward the faint glow of a convenience store sign at the far end of the block. Neon letters flickered in and out, buzzing against the storm. Her hair clung to her face, her vision blurred by water and tears, yet she pressed forward. The sound of thunder rolled above, shaking her resolve but not stopping it. Halfway there, her knees buckled. She collapsed against a lamppost, clutching it with both hands to keep from sinking back to the ground. Her breaths grew shallow, panic closing in. The thought of collapsing entirely terrified her, not because of herself, but because of the small life that depended on her. She whispered again, more to herself than to anyone listening, "Hold on, baby. Just hold on." A pair of footsteps splashed nearby. She turned her head and saw a figure under a large black umbrella. At first she feared it was him, returning to finish what he started, but the silhouette was too gentle, too cautious. A woman's voice cut through the storm, alarmed but kind. "Are you all right? My God, you're pregnant." "Luh." Before she could answer, her knees gave way, and she sank onto the slick pavement. The stranger rushed to her side, dropping the umbrella to place both hands on her shoulders. "Don't move. I'm calling for help." The glow of a cell phone lit the stranger's face as she dialed quickly. "There's a woman here. She's hurt. She's pregnant. Please send an ambulance right away." The sound of sirens began faint in the distance, then grew louder, a beacon of hope cutting through the despair. The woman stayed by her side, shielding her as best she could from the rain, murmuring soft words she could barely make out. When the ambulance arrived, the red and blue lights flashed across the wet street, reflecting off puddles like fractured stars. Paramedics rushed out with a stretcher, their movements brisk but careful. She tried to speak, tried to tell them about the baby, but the words came out broken, carried away by the rain. "You're safe now," one paramedic said firmly, wrapping a warm blanket around her shoulders. Another pressed a hand gently to her belly, listening as the fetal monitor began its steady rhythm. The sound was faint but strong, a heartbeat pulsing through the chaos. Relief washed over her like fire after ice. For the first time since he had abandoned her, she felt a flicker of certainty. She was alive, her baby was alive, and she was not completely alone. As the stretcher lifted her from the cold pavement, she clutched the blanket tighter and whispered again into the storm, her voice steady now. "We will survive. No matter what it takes, we will survive." The sirens faded as the ambulance sped through the city streets, cutting across the rain-slick roads toward the hospital. She lay on the stretcher, eyes half closed, body trembling under the weight of exhaustion. Every bump in the road sent a wave of fear through her, but the steady rhythm of the fetal monitor beside her soothed her frayed nerves. The baby's heartbeat was strong, defiant, like a drum announcing survival. By the time they reached the emergency entrance, a team was already waiting. Bright lights flooded her vision as paramedics wheeled her inside. Voices overlapped, firm and focused. "Check her vitals. 7 months pregnant. Possible trauma. Keep the monitor on." Hands worked quickly, wrapping a warm blanket tighter around her, adjusting 4 lines, pressing a stethoscope to her chest. For a moment, she wanted to disappear into the comfort of unconsciousness, to let someone else carry the weight, but she forced her eyes open, refusing to surrender. She needed to stay awake, to stay present for the life inside her. Hours blurred into minutes. Tests were run, scans taken, notes scribbled onto charts. Finally, when the room quieted and the chaos subsided, a new figure stepped inside. He was older, dressed not in a doctor's coat but in a tailored suit, carrying a leather briefcase under one arm. His eyes were sharp, but his tone when he spoke was gentle. "You are safe here," he said, pulling a chair close to her bed. "My name is Samuel Hayes. I am an attorney, but more importantly, I was a friend of your late grandfather." Her breath caught. "My grandfather?" she whispered, unsure if her exhausted mind was playing tricks on her. "Yes," Samuel nodded. "Your mother's father. A man who built an empire and left behind more than most people realize. He was searching for you, for years. And when he passed, his estate named you as the rightful heir. But your husband, he knows. That is why he wanted you out of the way." Her heart pounded louder than the monitor. Memories of half-told stories returned. She had been a child when her mother died, never knowing much about the family she came from. Her husband had always dismissed questions about her background, insisting it was irrelevant, steering her away from the subject. Now, for the first time, the silence made sense. She swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "You mean, all this time, he knew who I was?" Samuel leaned forward, his gaze steady. "Yes, and he tried to keep it from you, but you are stronger than he realized. You have proof of his betrayal, and now you have the truth of your inheritance. You are not powerless, you are not alone." Tears welled in her eyes, but they were no longer only from pain. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, she felt a current of hope cutting through the despair. She touched her belly again, whispering softly, "Did you hear that, little one? We are not alone." Samuel set a folder on the table beside her bed. Inside were papers, documents, copies of her grandfather's will, letters confirming her bloodline. "You will need time to recover," he said. "But when you are ready, we will stand together. There will be a trial, and you will not face it by yourself." She nodded slowly, her hand tightening around the blanket. The warmth of the hospital room wrapped around her like a shield, but it was his words that truly gave her strength. She was not just a discarded wife, not just a victim of betrayal. She was the granddaughter of a man who had left behind an empire, and she was the mother of a child who deserved a future built on truth. As Samuel rose to leave, he placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow, we begin the fight." She closed her eyes for a moment, letting the words sink in. Rest, then fight. For herself, for her child, for the life she was meant to claim. The morning sunlight streamed through the hospital blinds, soft and golden, yet her spirit was sharper than the night before. She sat upright in bed, the blanket folded neatly across her lap, her phone and a stack of papers resting on the table beside her. The exhaustion was still there, lingering in her bones, but something had shifted. The fear that once paralyzed her was now reshaped into resolve. Samuel Hayes, the attorney who had promised to stand with her, entered quietly, carrying another leather folder under his arm. His presence carried weight, the kind of authority that calmed chaos simply by walking into the room. He set the folder on the table, his eyes meeting hers with quiet confidence. "Today we begin," he said. She nodded, her hand brushing against her belly. "No more hiding, no more begging him for kindness. I am ready." They spread documents across the table. Bank transfers, hidden accounts, copies of her grandfather's will. Alongside them lay the most powerful weapon of all, her phone with the recordings of her husband's voice. She had replayed it more times than she wanted to admit, each cruel word burning into her memory. "She's a liability. When she disappears, everything will be ours." Every syllable was proof. Proof of betrayal, proof of intent, proof that she had been marked not as a partner in life, but as an obstacle to be erased. Samuel tapped the table gently, drawing her focus. "We will present this in court, but first, we need to build a sequence. His actions, his words, his motives. We will not only expose him, we will dismantle him piece by piece." She leaned forward, her eyes fierce. "He always thought I was weak. He thought I would stay silent. But this time, silence is not my choice." Her voice shook at first, then steadied, echoing through the room with a clarity that surprised even her. Samuel gave a faint smile. "That is the voice of someone who has already won." Hours passed in focused rhythm. They arranged evidence into sections, building a timeline of deceit. She signed affidavits, her pen moving steadily even as her hands trembled. Samuel explained each step with patience, outlining how the court would receive the case, what questions would be asked, and how she must stand when facing him again. At one point she hesitated, staring at her reflection in the hospital's small mirror. Her face was pale, her eyes tired, but there was a new light in them, one she hadn't seen in years. "He will try to destroy me in front of everyone," she whispered. Samuel's voice was calm but unwavering. "He will try, but you will not stand alone, and the evidence is stronger than his lies." Her fingers brushed against the small necklace she wore, the only piece of her mother's she had left. It became a symbol in her mind, a reminder that her story did not end in the street that night. It continued here, in this room, with plans laid out like weapons sharpened for battle. By late afternoon, the table looked like a war map. Contracts, recordings, photographs, and legal statements formed a fortress of truth. She placed her hand on her stomach again, whispering softly, "He thinks I am gone. That is his greatest mistake. I am still here, and I will rise." "No." Samuel gathered the documents back into the folder, his tone final. "Rest now. Tomorrow we take the next step. He believes you are broken, but what he does not know is that you have already begun to rebuild. That is the advantage we hold." She leaned back against the pillows, her chest rising with a deep breath. For the first time since the nightmare began, she felt control returning to her life. She was no longer only surviving. She was preparing to fight, to reclaim her voice, her identity, and the legacy stolen from her. As the lights dimmed and evening shadows fell across the room, she closed her eyes with a thought that pulsed like a vow. "He thinks I am gone, but I am coming back, stronger than ever." The courthouse was buzzing long before the session began. Reporters gathered at the steps, microphones and cameras ready, their voices overlapping as they speculated about the high-profile case. Rumors of betrayal and secret inheritances had already leaked, and the city was waiting for answers. The rain from the night before had cleared, leaving the sky sharp and blue, as if the world itself knew something monumental was about to unfold. Inside, the courtroom filled quickly. Rows of wooden benches creaked under the weight of journalists, curious onlookers, and shareholders who had once bowed to her husband's authority. At the front, he stood with his mistress by his side, their expressions smug, confident that the day would belong to them. He adjusted his tie, flashing a smile to the cameras, as if nothing could shake the empire he believed he still controlled. Then the heavy doors opened. The room fell into sudden silence. Every head turned. She entered slowly, each step steady, her figure framed by the light pouring in from the hallway. The hush deepened as her swollen belly came into view, covered by a simple but elegant dress. The sight of her alive, standing tall, undid every whisper that she had been destroyed. Gasps rippled through the crowd. A photographer's flash illuminated her face, revealing eyes no longer dulled by fear but sharpened by resolve. Her husband's smirk faltered. The mistress gripped his arm, her nails digging into his sleeve, as if seeking reassurance. The bailiff's voice echoed, "All rise." Moat. Everyone stood. But it was not just for the judge who entered. It was for her, for the unexpected return of a woman they thought had been discarded and forgotten. She walked toward the front, accompanied by Samuel Hayes. His briefcase swung at his side, heavy with the evidence that would unravel everything. She felt the weight of dozens of eyes on her, but she did not flinch. She took her place across from the man who had once vowed to love her, the same man who had left her shivering on a dark street. Their gazes met, and for the first time she saw something flicker in his eyes. Not dominance, not arrogance. Fear. The judge's gavel struck, bringing order to the room. Papers shuffled, microphones clicked on. The trial began. Samuel stood first, his voice calm but commanding. "Your Honor, before we begin, I would like to present proof that the woman standing beside me is not only the victim of abuse and abandonment but also the rightful heir to the Whitmore fortune, as specified in the will of her late grandfather." The courtroom erupted in whispers. The judge raised a hand for silence. "Proceed." Samuel opened the briefcase and laid documents on the table. Photographs, legal letters, notarized pages. Finally, he placed her birth certificate and her grandfather's will side by side, undeniable proof of her bloodline. Reporters scribbled furiously. Cameras clicked. She sat upright, her hand resting gently on her stomach, her chin lifted. For the first time, she spoke aloud in the courtroom. Her voice was clear, unwavering. "I am not a liability. I am not broken. I am the rightful heir, and I will not be silenced." The judge studied her, then turned to the husband. His face was pale, sweat beading along his hairline. The mistress shifted uneasily, her earlier confidence draining away with each passing second. The gavel struck again. "This court will recognize the documents presented. From this moment, she will be addressed as the legal heir to the Whitmore estate. All claims by her husband will be suspended pending further investigation." The room erupted once more. Reporters shouted questions. Investors muttered. The husband's hand clenched into a fist on the table, his jaw tight as he realized control was slipping away. She inhaled deeply, steadying herself as the cameras focused on her. The moment was more than survival. It was vindication. Against all odds, she had returned, not as a victim begging for mercy, but as the rightful heiress of an empire her husband had tried to steal. And he knew, from the way she looked at him across that courtroom, that this was only the beginning. The declaration of her rightful inheritance echoed in the courtroom long after the judge's gavel fell silent. For a few moments, the air itself seemed frozen, thick with disbelief. Then the whispers began, low at first, like the rustle of leaves in a storm, before rising into a roar that filled every corner of the chamber. Reporters leapt to their feet, cameras flashed like lightning, and investors whispered among themselves with urgency. Her husband's face drained of color. The man who had once strutted through boardrooms with arrogance now looked like a figure carved out of wax, melting under the heat of truth. He wiped his brow with the back of his hand, but the sweat kept forming, betraying the panic that pulsed beneath his skin. Beside him, the mistress shifted nervously in her seat. Her perfect smile cracked. The diamond bracelet she had flaunted so boldly no longer gleamed with pride but weighed heavy on her wrist, a chain of guilt. She glanced at him for reassurance, but found none. His eyes darted, wild, searching for a lifeline that no longer existed. Samuel Hayes rose again, his voice steady and deliberate. "Your Honor, I request that the court acknowledge the additional evidence of financial manipulation and attempted coercion against my client. The recordings of his words, the hidden accounts, the trail of deceit. All of it speaks to a pattern of abuse and exploitation." The judge nodded gravely. "Proceed with the evidence." The sound of her husband's own voice soon filled the courtroom, projected through the speakers. "She's becoming a liability. Once she is out of the picture, everything will be ours." The words landed like blows. Each sentence stripped away another layer of his carefully crafted facade. The crowd gasped audibly, heads turning toward him with disgust and anger. "No, no, this is taken out of context," he stammered, his voice cracking. "You don't understand. She was unstable, But the judge cut him off. "Enough. This is not the first time such behavior has been documented. The evidence is overwhelming." As more documents were laid out, his empire began to crumble in real time. Photographs of forged signatures, bank records showing transfers to secret accounts, testimonies from employees he had bullied into silence. Each revelation was a nail in the coffin of his reputation. The shareholders in the back row whispered furiously. One finally stood, his voice carrying. "We cannot allow him to continue leading this company. "He is finished." Others nodded, murmuring their agreement. The room had turned, the tide irreversible. She sat quietly, watching it unfold. Her hand rested on her belly, steady, while inside her chest her heart hammered with both relief and fury. He had tried to erase her, yet here he was, unraveling in front of everyone. Justice was not just spoken, it was visible. The mistress snapped suddenly, her voice shrill. "This isn't fair. He promised us everything." Her outburst only deepened the shame. The judge's eyes narrowed, signaling the bailiff. The mistress shrank back into her seat, realizing too late that the room was no longer hers to perform in. Finally, the gavel struck once more. "This court finds sufficient grounds to proceed with charges of domestic abuse, fraud, and attempted coercion. He is hereby ordered into custody pending trial." The bailiff moved forward, handcuffs glinting under the fluorescent lights. The husband's protests echoed weakly. "Wait, you don't know what you're doing. I built this empire. It's mine." But his voice faltered as the cuffs locked around his wrists. The sight drew another eruption from the crowd, not of chaos but of closure. Shareholders exhaled, journalists scribbled furiously, and the public watching from the gallery began to cheer. The empire he had guarded so viciously was gone, slipping from his grasp in front of the very woman he had tried to destroy. She lifted her chin, her voice calm yet cutting. "You thought I was powerless, but today everyone saw the truth. You cannot erase me. You cannot erase our child. We are stronger than you ever imagined." Her words carried farther than she expected, echoing through the chamber, settling into the ears of every listener. The balance of power had shifted entirely. He was no longer the man in control. He was the man who had lost everything, undone by his own cruelty. And she, the woman left shivering on a dark street, now stood as the true heir, the mother who had fought back, the figure of strength that no amount of betrayal could ever silence. The courtroom slowly emptied, leaving behind the echo of footsteps and the faint murmur of reporters still waiting outside. The man who had once held her life in his fists was led away in handcuffs, his head bowed, his voice drowned beneath the weight of justice. The mistress followed, shouting half-formed excuses that no one cared to hear. Their power, their arrogance, their empire, it was all gone. She remained seated for a moment, letting the quiet sink in. Samuel Hayes placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's over," he said softly. She exhaled deeply, her body trembling as though it had been carrying years of fear, and was only now allowed to release them. Her hand drifted once again to her belly. The child stirred gently, as if to remind her that this victory was not hers alone. Outside, the courthouse steps were packed with cameras. The crowd erupted into questions when she appeared in the doorway. Flashes lit the afternoon sky, and microphones pushed toward her face. But instead of shrinking back, she lifted her chin and faced them with a calm strength that silenced the noise. Her voice was steady. "This is not just my story. It is the story of every woman who has been silenced, every mother who has been told she has no power. Today proves that truth cannot be buried. Justice is possible, and no empire built on lies can last forever." Applause rose from the onlookers. Some clapped, some shouted encouragement, others simply wept, moved by the sight of her standing tall when she had once been left in the street with nothing. In the weeks that followed, her life shifted into something she could never have imagined. The papers declared her the legal heir to her grandfather's empire. Board members extended their hands, this time not out of courtesy to her husband but out of respect for her authority. Contracts were rewritten, stock prices stabilized, and the company that had nearly been stolen from her returned to its rightful hands. But she did not let victory blind her. She moved carefully, choosing allies wisely, restructuring the empire not as a monument to greed but as a legacy for her child. She visited the nursery that had once felt like a dream deferred. The crib still stood, the mobile of silver stars swaying gently in the light of a new morning. She placed her hand on the railing and smiled. "You will never know the fear I endured," she whispered to the life inside her. "You will only know the strength we found." Samuel visited often, guiding her through legal transitions, but also offering something more: friendship. A reminder that not all men sought power through domination, that loyalty and compassion could exist alongside strength. On the day her son was born, the hospital room glowed with warmth instead of fear. Nurses placed the newborn in her arms, his tiny fists curling around her finger. Tears filled her eyes, but they were not tears of despair. They were tears of triumph, of life continuing despite every attempt to extinguish it. She pressed her lips to his forehead and whispered, We survived, and now we will live. Weeks later, standing on a stage at a charity gala she had organized for women in crisis, she looked out at the crowd. The lights reflected in her eyes, the sound of applause echoing in her ears. She was no longer the woman left on a wet sidewalk, broken and forgotten. She was the heir, the mother, the leader who had rebuilt her life piece by piece. Her closing words were simple, yet they carried the weight of her entire journey. Strength is not found in silence. It is found in the courage to stand, even when the world pushes you down. My story is proof of that. The audience rose to their feet, clapping until the hall shook with sound. In that moment, she knew her past no longer defined her. She had stepped into a future she had earned. A future no one could ever take away again.